Amit, welcome to Vienna.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here.
I've been in this institute now for 2 years. I ended up here partly by accident. I wasn't looking for anything. And as you know, most of the interesting things in life are things you're not looking for. You know, it was John Lennon that said, life happens while you're planning the future. And I was planning a retirement and playing golf, and I ended up here setting up an institute. And one of the activities of the institute is having events on topics that we think are relevant to the present and the future, and then bringing together interesting people from around the world. And having discussions, having podcasts, making videos, so on and so forth. And so this topic, the future of money, is sort of an interesting topic. I was reading George Friedman's book. He was a Hungarian geopolitician, and he wrote a book called The Next 100 Years. Now, you know, to talk about the next 100 years, you have to have big kahunas, right? Because it's a big topic. And what was interesting, he didn't talk about money in the whole book. Can you actually think about the future today and not talk about the role of money in the future?
It's an interesting concept because we're starting to see some of the practical implementations of that. And let me give you the example of how that would work. We're already transitioning from, let's say, a cash model that involved me giving you cash for a service or a product or as a gift that was rendered. It involved a very manual transaction between one person to the other. You may have had an intermediary in between, but it still involved a transaction. It was literal, it was intended. We've now moved to a digital currency world. 92% of all transactions today in the world are digital, which is pretty amazing.
Oh, wow. I would have, you know, I just came from South Africa in Cape Town, which...
Beautiful, by the way.
It's one of the most beautiful
Stunning.
places on earth. It really is. And everywhere you could use digital transactions.
It's exactly true. In fact, it's really interesting. Of course, there are some places in the Western world, Sweden rates right up at the top, where less than 5% of transactions in Sweden are non-digital, which is really fascinating to think about it. But when you go to places in the world where you would not imagine, a great example is, you know, the African continent. It's very true in parts of South America as well. It's not only that it's moving to digital, it's moving to cryptocurrency digital.
Yes.
So it's a fascinating, I always say economic shifts, technological shifts are actually socio-cultural shifts. Not because the technology triggers them, it's because the socio-cultural shifts drive the technology adoption, not the innovation. And so what's really fascinating to your original point of like, can you imagine money going away? It's not that money goes away, it's how the transactions occur that causes money to go away in our daily lives. Your AI, your agentic frameworks will interact with my agentic frameworks and the frameworks that connect to the contextual relevance of your life. And those will transact on your behalf. They're still transacting. The mode of transaction is digital. Maybe the mode of transaction is crypto. That doesn't matter. What matters is that in the whole day, instead of the literal intent-based transactions that consume 100% of our days today, those will drop to less than 10%. And 90% of our transactions will be non-intent-based transactions that our agents are doing on our behalf. So in a weird way, Thomas maybe didn't understand that piece because he's not a technologist, but he was talking to the socio-cultural impact of exactly the same thing.
Interesting. And I was just talking to the gentleman before you, and I asked him, is fintech coming out of finance or out of technology? And he said it's coming out of technology. And it's not the other way around. So it's technology driving the way in which we want to interact.
Interesting. I mean, it's sort of like the life imitates art, art imitates life, which came first. And I think those are, it's sort of like the chicken and the egg, although that's been resolved. They found DNA recently that suggests that the chicken came first and it was not possible for the egg to be hatched. But I would say that technology as a driver of future finance is a little bit of this Silicon Valley regime, if you may. And I have a slight philosophical challenge to that. I think that what Silicon Valley, and I don't mean necessarily the location, but the mindset.
The
right?
mindset, yes.
What Silicon Valley has driven is this idea of the brightest innovators, the brightest minds, building the what and focusing on the how they build it, right? So the what is a new AI platform that does X. The how is using the latest in RAG models and using a few open source LLMs. And what it ignores until it needs to find a business model is the why and the for whom.
Yeah.
And I think in life in general, if we're driven by there is poverty in this part, there are inefficiencies in healthcare, there are extra costs in financial markets,
Right.
That's the why.
That's the why, yeah.
The whom is who this is going to touch in the most meaningful way. That should drive the what we build and the how we build it. And so it feels a little bit like the tail wagging the dog rather than the dog wagging the tail. And therefore, I would make the contention that instead of technology driving finance or finance driving technology, the socio-cultural evolution of society will determine what kind of financial needs we have and what technology best allows that to be fulfilled. And I think that would be
that sounds like men hate coins because they cause holes in their pockets. And women carried big purses full of change, and neither one of us were happy with that. And we found a way to, and it's not the bills that were the problem, it was the coins that were the problem.
That's exactly right. And it can be, the smallest of these, like such a great socio-cultural example, right? Behavioral. And I think you can make the argument in so many ways for crypto versus purely digital.
Yeah.
We've had digital for about 30 years
30
now,
years,
right?
yeah.
And arguably crypto for 14. But from the perspective of where today you can send money to someone you're sponsoring in Africa, and the fact that you can, of course, do it with Bitcoin, and it's the ultimate, non-surveillance, non-centralized currency out there, but you could send it with a stable coin today and have a zero cost of zero cost of transaction. And I think the driver for that is not that you want to sponsor a kid. You did that 30 years ago. You maybe did that 60 years ago. The driver was that every time you sent €100, the kid received 70.
Right.
And that stopped being okay.
That's not being okay, yeah.
Exactly.
Let me sort of switch. When I saw your picture, I said, oh my God, this is an interesting person. And you represent this group of people from India that have migrated to the West, bringing with you a rich culture, a rich history, blending into the West, getting educated here, and they're making great contributions. We see this with Indians running the major tech companies in areas I don't know, everywhere in academia, even and how do you see yourself? And I mean, I know a couple of things, right? You got a PhD at Stanford, and is that right, or that was someone else?
That was someone else, yeah.
Oh, that was someone else.
Yeah.
But you're educated in the U.S.,
Australia and the
And
US.
and you're now living out in California. How do you see yourself as someone from India merging with this Western culture and helping us understand the world?
So a funny story. 5-6 years ago, there was a little bit of retaliation towards especially people of color in the Valley. This was triggered by some of the conversations around the Trump first term. And I remember talking to Indian friends there, which of course there are many, and they were like, we're worried, we're like this minority, and people of our skin color are being targeted. And I said, if there's one thing Indians have stopped being, that's a minority. If there's one thing Indians have stopped being, it is on the periphery. We are the CEOs of the largest tech companies, the largest VCs, the largest value drivers. And I think at the crux of your question, part of what is starting to happen is the bridging of these cultures. There's a very modern India at play. I grew up in a very British culture, even within India.
I'm familiar with India, and I figured that.
Exactly. And education has always been sort of an imperative, largely because in a country that is that populated, you're not going to be able to rise above if you don't have the best of education. Right. So there's a lot of very hungry people. At the same time, it's a culture of spirituality and peace, and obviously you know this. And I think when you start to combine those things, when you start to combine the pursuit of purpose versus the pursuit of permanence. Permanence was the last era. Need the big house, need the big car, need the high-paying job, make parents proud. And purpose is the era we live in now, where my mission is to give everyone their own personal AI that they own, so that they can earn a daily sustainable income from their AI, from their data, right? And all of this while preserving their privacy and switching out the model that big tech has, led us to for the last 35, 40 years. Purpose drives my mission. And when you combine that with intelligence, education, exposure, experience, a lot of tech backgrounds, you can start to see why Indians in general are doing well. It definitely drives much of why I do what I do. The wealth generation is not the primary motive at all. It's a secondary. It often happens when you build purpose at scale. For me, building, investing, influencing technology plays are driven by that purpose. When I turned 40, I spent a lot of time thinking about what is my lens. I mean, you have this experience, when you're around the industry for a while, you start to attract shiny objects. Shiny objects are very hard to say no to, well, because they're shiny. And so you need a lens to be able to say, look, it doesn't matter that this is shiny. This doesn't fit my lens. And for me, I distilled it down to one sentence, which is the crux of what you were saying. I only create, invest, and influence in people and projects that create a net positive impact on the humans they intend to serve.
Would you say you're in impact investing?
Absolutely. I do a lot of impact investing. Rainfall is designed to be an impact company as well.
Yeah.
And I'm a great believer in the thinking and the practice that the challenges of impact are not just about are we doing good. The challenges of impact are we marrying the right ambition with the right technology to the idea of are we doing good? Are we creating a net positive impact, right? You can look at, I would make the argument Facebook is a great example of a company that's mission is to connect the world and has created, in reality, a more divided world, divided countries, divided cultural, political constructs than one could have ever imagined.
Because
the algorithms are driving that division,
Yeah.
right? It's not...
Was that intended or was that an accident?
It
or
is,
it doesn't matter?
Yeah, it's. I would say it started out as an accident and now has become intentional because it's the revenue drivers
Because it makes money, yeah.
Are phenomenal, right? And so that goes into the question of net positive impact at design stage and net positive impact on an ongoing basis. And if you aren't building with that in mind, then we'll always have, always say that, show me a tyrant dictator and I'll show you a one-time freedom fighter.
Yeah.
Right. No one stands up and says, I'm Amit and I want to be a tyrant dictator.
Yeah,
You start fighting for good reasons,
yeah,
right?
No, I totally agree. When I used to think about the future a lot because I went to school in the 70s, started my PhD, the same year the microprocessor was invented, 1971. So I grew up with this technology, and we never understood it.
Yeah.
Or we never understood the interaction between the technology and humanity on the purpose or outcome, but we stumbled along. And, we entered the 21st century, and there was this evolutionary biologist named Edward Wilson, who had a very interesting insight. He said, we entered the 21st century with Stone Age technologies. We're sort of primitive people, We entered the 21st century with antiquated institutions, right? They've been around for hundreds of years.
Sure.
And with godlike technologies. And, I think about this all the time. And there's two ways that this influences my thinking. One is that, God, we can't do anything for people, the institutions won't change, and the technologies are going to run wild, and I don't know where we end up. And the flip side of that is, and you've motivated me to think more about this, that we can actually use these godlike technologies to purposefully impact people to improve their lives.
Absolutely. And I would even make the argument that the companies that will return the most capital over the next 2 decades are the ones that net positively, deeply impact people's lives.
Yeah.
You think about it, we spend so much time in the startup world thinking about target markets and what you can focus on and how many you can peel away. There are close to 200 million displaced people in the world today, right? If you're a startup building, let's say, decentralized self-sovereign identity on chain, you have such a blind spot to the fact that there are 200 million people in this world today whose biggest problem is identity.
Yeah.
They leave because of genocide, they leave because of famine, they leave because of...
And they have no identity.
And they have no identity. They leave without a passport.
Right.
They leave without ID cards. And the opportunity to provide identity to 200 million people as a reference point to then go back to the world's largest companies and say, we've decentralized identity for 200 million of the world's most vulnerable in places of most conflict. We can do you easy.
Yeah.
And I think that because we tend to have those blind spots, because we're not thinking about exactly the way you phrased it, you're not thinking about how do we help use this godlike technology to help even the most vulnerable, then in many ways, I think we not only miss out on our biggest opportunity, we don't service our privilege and fulfill our responsibility. And, changing the idea that godlike technology is created by godlike men who assume and create godlike power, which has been the model for the past 20, 30 years. The fact that we can step away from that, the fact that, for me, the creating and fulfilling the purpose of Rainfall has literally nothing to do with Amit, the person, right? or Amit the executive, or Amit the founder. And building for purpose and building in that way by design, I think allows us, and I can tell already you're a rose-tinted glass optimist like I am, we can truly, truly fulfill the promise that this godlike technology is starting to give us.
It's starting to give us. It's literally unbelievable.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
How did you meet Peter?
Peter and I were speaking at an event in Ibiza 2 years ago. It's the first of the Ibiza Tech Forums, and we were both speaking, and we met each other and realized we were both connectors, building network, wanted to provide value rather than take value, pay it forward, and realizing that individually, going back to that philosophy of our last conversation, that it almost doesn't matter what we do individually. It's what we can enable collectively.
Yeah.
And today is such a great example. The chances that I would have met you, and what we can collaborate on coming from this, and then whatever comes next, it's enabled by that mindset, and that's how I met Peter.
It's interesting. When Naomi and I first started looking into creating this institute, the first person she introduced me to was Peter. And I was in Budapest at the time, and so I called him up, went over and met him in his office, and we had this sort of interesting connection, and that's how, he has introduced us to a group of people that he has known, and it has been a very rewarding and interesting experience. Well, Amit, thank you very much for being here, and I look forward to our session this afternoon.
I look forward to it. Thank you very much. This is a real pleasure.